everyone, and welcome to the UN Correspondents Association. I'm Louis Charbonneau from Human Rights Watch. And I apologize for the fact that we don't have name cards in front of us. We did not print them out, but we do have the names of the three of us on a piece of paper over there, handwritten, very old school. And then in the Zoom, there are people who are joining us on Zoom. They will be able to see our names. We'll put it in the chat there. So we would like to thank the UN Correspondents Association for hosting us. We've had a long and very, we think, fruitful and powerful relationship with UNCA over the years, and this is just the latest of our press conferences. We launched our World Report for 2024 in this very room back in January. Today, we are launching a new report by Human Rights Watch on North Korea. That report is called A Sense of Terror Stronger Than a Bullet. It's 161 pages, including the appendix, so it's book length. It was 3 years in the making. It's a very major undertaking, and we are fortunate to have the lead author on the report here, Lena Yoon, who will be giving the presentation. Following Lena, we have Soyun Lee, who is an escapee from North Korea. Some of you may have seen her at the ARIA Security Council meeting last year. She's also a human rights advocate, very much an expert, and we are honored to have her sitting at the table with us. And just a little housekeeping thing, where they'll give presentations, then we will open it up for questions. People who are following on Zoom, please put your questions in the Q&A, and we will do our best to answer them after the presentations. And please introduce yourselves. This is for everyone. When we get to the Q&A, introduce yourselves and the media you represent. And without further ado, let me hand it over to Lena.
Thank you, Lou. Thank you, Lou. As I'm Lena Yoon, I'm the North Korea researcher, and I've been at Human Rights Watch since 2014. And I am a journalist by training, this report really describes, this report really looks into the closing of North Korea during the last 5 years, and really tries to delve into the grave human rights consequences this whole process has had. I mean, to our knowledge, this is the most comprehensive study that has been done looking at North Korea's isolationist policies and the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the unintended consequences of the UN Security Council sanctions. Like all research in North Korea, getting information is extremely difficult because of the lack of access. And this has become much harder during the COVID-19 pandemic. Our research, naturally, has traditionally and always relied on interviewing North Korean people that had escaped the country. But now, I mean, it is almost impossible for North Korean people to escape. So we need alternative, different means of research. I mean, so this report that has 161 pages, as Lou mentioned, includes in-depth analysis of satellite imagery. We had done open source analysis of videos and photography, and also analyze international trade data. And then we also reference media that has reports with contacts inside the country, which in the past we had not included in our reports, but we used as reference for our personal consultations. So A Sense of Terror Stronger Than a Bullet is about how the North Korean government's overbroad and prolonged responses during the COVID-19 pandemic, some of which still are in place today, and combined with this, the impact of the UN Security Council sanctions of 2016 and 17, and the North Korean government's reaction to them, as well as its persistent drive to control its population through fear, have turned North Korea, which was already effectively a countrywide prison, into a place that's even more centralized, more repressive, and more isolated than before. These have also harmed the economy, people's ability to make a living, and has exacerbated the existing humanitarian crisis that has affected availability of food and basic necessities that North Korean people need to survive. Cross-border activities were almost completely blocked during the COVID-19 pandemic. The North Korean government has implemented overbroad, excessive, and unnecessary measures, including quarantines and restrictions on almost all official trade, international and domestic travel, economic activity, and has built new security infrastructures in the northern border. We have conducted an in-depth analysis of 6 selected areas as representative of the whole border, which cover 321 kilometers out of the almost 1,400 whole kilometers of the northern border. This analysis found that almost all the areas analyzed were fenced by 2023 or 2023, compared to 71% of the areas that were covered back before 2020. Now, most of it has double fences with 267 kilometers of double fence. And security infrastructures like guard posts have increased 20-fold since 2019. I mean, these border crackdowns, combined with the unintended and negative effects of enforcement of Security Council sanctions since late 2017, have made almost all unsanctioned domestic and international travel impossible, whether it is to conduct informal commercial activities or escape the country. A former secret police officer who left North Korea several years ago and who is in contact with relatives in the country told me life has become harder and harder every day because of COVID-19. The transportation situation was already bad, but with the COVID-19 pandemic, people are not allowed to move around, and it has become harder to talk on unsanctioned phones. There is constant surveillance of calls. Things there don't change every day, like outside of North Korea. Life was hard when I left and remains difficult. If anything, life is getting tougher and tougher, much more dreadful with the COVID-19 pandemic. Following the failed Hanoi summit of 2019, the North Korean government intensified ideological controls to prevent unrest. And since COVID-19, the government has implemented severe measures that increase fear and alarm among the population. Like some of the examples are a standing shoot-on-sight order to any person or animal approaching the northern border without authorization, or a possible death penalty or execution for breaking emergency quarantine orders, or accepting bribes, or distributing unsanctioned foreign media content, or using language that may have South Korean or other foreign influence. A North Korean woman in contact with relatives inside North Korea told me, it is not about the fear of a wire fence. It is more the emotional environment and fear more than the actual physical barrier. My relative is scared to leave because of the creation of a social environment, a general sense of terror, much stronger than a bullet or a wire fence. Another North Korean woman in contact with relatives inside North Korea said, I asked my relative how she's doing. She said, life wasn't life. She repeated that twice. We were seeing each other's faces and we all cried. It was dangerous and we turned off the video. She didn't say, but we knew. It was not just about the economic difficulties, it was about the nostalgia, the fear of repression, fear of not seeing each other again before dying, and the repression, the hopelessness, and fear. These new or intensified restrictions enabled the government to strengthen its grip on power and reimpose control where its dominance had weakened over the last 30 years. Informal cross-border movement and trade, unregulated private market activity, domestic travel without permits, and access to unauthorized information from outside the country are some of the examples. As North Korea was already one of the poorest countries before the pandemic, and the North Korean government diverted billions of dollars of revenue to develop nuclear weapons and missiles and neglected basic social public services, all these new restrictions have also exacerbated the country's already grave humanitarian situation and people's ability to access food, medicine, and essential goods. For this interview, we interviewed 32 North Korean escapees with particular knowledge or experience of relevant conditions in recent years, including 6 former government officials, 10 North Koreans living in South Korea with contacts inside in the country, and 12 former traders who are very familiar with cross-border trade. But the report also draws on almost 150 in-depth interviews that we have conducted since I joined Human Rights Watch in 2014, and many more, and I think it's over 100 that I did before I joined, when I was a journalist before. It is really difficult to gauge the full scope of the human rights and humanitarian impacts of these new restrictions and closures that I have documented in this report. But what is clear is that these people in North Korea are now almost entirely cut off from the rest of the world. They're enduring horrific right violations and a calamitous humanitarian situation with no end in sight. What's the bottom line here? This increasing grave human rights situation and humanitarian and economic crisis in North Korea really calls for greater scrutiny by the international community. And UN member states need to urgently consider steps to address this isolation and the impact it has on the population. UN members with diplomatic relations in North Korea should re-engage with North Korea, offer direct talks to North Korea, and encourage the North Korean government to repeal these excessive COVID-19 related measures and allow urgently monitored emergency health and humanitarian back into the country. The UN Security Council should also meet and debate North Korean human rights as well, as many times as possible this year, whether it's through official debates or whether it's through unofficial debates, on whether it's during security-related discussions. Human rights cannot be ignored. We are also calling on the international community should also be supporting efforts to strengthen international judicial accountability work that's being done to increase the cost of the violations that are happening in North Korea. I think that's it. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thanks. And now, would you like to introduce Soyun?
So we have Soyun here. She's a North Korean escapee. She's come from Pyongyang, and she escaped the country in 2014. She's going to share a little bit about her story.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning. Thank you for joining us today and having me. So obviously I left North Korea before the pandemic, so the situation within the country might be different from what I knew and experienced, but I firmly believe there are many aspects that has not changed over time. So North Korean people, this is the fact that still face a reality that feels like living in a prison where human rights and freedom are virtually non-existent. So even though I was born and raised in Pyongyang, a city many North Koreans dream of living in, my life was nothing like the lives of any people like sitting here in this room. So I can define my life in North Korea was like was by the constant brainwashing and compliance. So from an early age, including myself, all the North Korean kids learn to say thank you dear leader before even knowing how to thank their own parents. So in North Korea, students are far more than just learners. So, I mean, here, when we go to school, we normally expect to learn those like sciences and then mathematics and the languages. But in North Korea, the education is a tool to uphold and support the Kim regime's power. So I would say students are learning those languages to learn the ideologies of the regime and then equip themselves those mentally ready to support the regime, but at the same time we are kind of manipulated and exploited with the forced labors and mobilizations. So for example, each spring and autumn, students were sent to the rural areas for about like 20 days at a time to support the agricultural work. And national holidays also, I mean, normally when there is a like big anniversaries of those national holidays, we are mobilized for those events as a staff. So in the first year of my college at Kim Il-sung University, I participated the marching as one of the staff, like holding the torches, and then we practiced this for like more than 3 months, holding all the classes in a like hot weather without any proper rest and facilities. And then I got sick. I got the inflammation in my leg, and then I really needed surgery. But the people in charge of those events refused me go to see the doctor and then have the immediate surgery because it was only 3 days left for the major big event. So these small cases like proves that students, even the kids, are exposed to those like human rights violations in general daily lives. And then the level of surveillance in Pyongyang suppresses the perhaps any other region in North Korea. So every aspect of our lives is monitored: what you wear, where you go, and what you carry. So agents from any departments, especially those state security departments and police, and then the school youth league officers, I mean, they exist everywhere on the streets. They can randomly select the people and then inspect the baggages. And it is just too normal for the North Korean people, and then nobody questions why. And then even if they feel humiliated, they cannot resist it. And what I want to emphasize is that this intense scrutiny is not just about maintaining order, but it's about a kind of squishing any political for dissent and unrest for the public. So in general, many North Korean people growing up in such like a restrictive environment, and then this environment teaches you how to obey before you understand and introduce the concept of human rights and what the freedom is. So I would say in North Korea, people accept the government policies and the regulations without any questions, as they would accept that 1 + 1 is equals 2 in mathematics. So this kind of like dynamic enabled the Kim regime to advance their development of the nuclear weapons and long-range missiles, even as many people suffer from the starvation and without any resistance. So I want to end my kind of the testimony with this sentence: the international community, especially UN, should focus on the human rights issues of North Korea and intervene in the issue not only for the matter of the human dignity and freedom, but also for the political reasons. So, thank you.
Thank you both. We'll now open it up for questions. So for those who are following on Zoom, please post questions in the Q&A and identify yourself. And for those in the room, also identify yourself. And let's open it up now. Who wants to break the ice? Okay, Evelyn.
All right, okay. Could you kindly tell us how you got out, how you escaped? And secondly, does China return any Korean they find to the government?
So in my case, I will say a little bit different from the other North Korean escapees' experiences, because my father was the government officer in North Korea, and
What officer?
Like economic government officer, and he got his last position that enabling him to take his whole entire family to China and then conduct the businesses for the government. So I was able to legally stay in China as a student, foreign exchange student. And during that time, we had our own passport, and that makes us much easier to purchase the tickets and then make a flight to South Korea.
Can I ask, you mentioned obviously that your experience might not reflect reality in North Korea right now, but how much communication do you have with friends or family in North Korea, and what have they told you about the difference between what you experience and what's happening now?
So I knew many of the North Korean escapees have the direct contact with the people inside of North Korea, but it is almost impossible to have the direct contact with the people and the Pyongyang. I assume that many people who have the direct contact from the border areas. So, and for the sake of their security, it is better not to directly contact them for me, since it's just adds more risk to their daily lives. But the lives, as one of the testimony mentioned, that the life is getting worse and worse and harsher and harsher. So I don't think there are much differences before compared to the 10 years ago in North Korea. Thank you.
Maybe I'll just add.
Yeah.
So I think Evelyn asked about China's forced repatriations of North Koreans. So when North Koreans are living in China without passports or without visas, they will be considered economic migrants. They will be detained and they will be sent back to North Korea. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, there has been a number of North Koreans that were detained, but for over 3 years, they have not been sent back, mostly because of North Koreans' closure policies. But there was over 500 that were sent back late last year. And then also maybe in terms of on communicating with back in North Korea. I did talk to 12 North Koreans that are in South Korea in contact with their relatives, and also many activists that have contacts inside the country. It has become extremely difficult to communicate with people that are not living in the border areas. Because before, people would be able to travel south or from the south to the north and then get in contact with people outside of the country, because they all use unsanctioned Chinese phones. And so you need kind of that coverage from the Chinese network in order to be able to talk to people. But because movement domestically has become much more difficult, because the use of unsanctioned Chinese phones has become more dangerous inside the country, we're seeing that less and less. So, for example, I think based on many of the interviews, out of 10 former brokers that were able to either send money into North Korea or have phone calls and communicate with different people inside the country in 2019, by 2022, there was only one left that still had that ability.
Thanks. Other questions? Okay, let's start from the back over there. Oh, and I should add that our colleague John Sifton, who is the Asia Advocacy Director for Human Rights Watch, he is here in the room, so he can pipe in, and if you have any questions on, for example, Japan's position on North Korea or other issues, then he's your man.
Thank you. I'm from Joseon, South Korea, and I wrote a report. And thank you for your work. The amount of report was huge. And the first question is the iron fence expansion part. Is something completely new part? Is the one iron?
Sorry, the what?
Iron fence. Iron fence expansion is completely new. And the second is, do you think that expanding iron fence is a bad policy against
COVID-19, and those set up at some point between 2012 and 2015-16 when Kim Jong-un got in power, and he has stipulated that North Korean escapees were not as enemies of the state, and he was starting to try to block the North Koreans that were able to leave the country. I mean, of course, like the numbers that are arriving to South Korea are not really representatives of this number, but I think as a general reference, is good to know that in 2011, 3,000 North Koreans arrived to South Korea, and the following year that drops to half of it, right? So between 2019, 2020, and 2022 and 2023, more or less, there is this massive expansion of fences. I think there's like more than, within the areas that we analyzed in the 321 kilometers, there was at least like new, there were 500 kilometers of new fencing, right? And so, these fences are established with the pretext of protecting against COVID, and most probably in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, North Korea did close the country very quickly because they are aware of how weak their health system is and how dangerous contagious diseases can be within the North Korean system. But I mean, when we look at the shoot-on-sight order that was established in August 2020 and it's still standing today, the shoot-on-sight orders are not against people that are trying to enter the country, thus protecting them towards COVID. It is really against North Korean people trying to reach the Chinese side of the border.
Thanks. Next question. From Yonhan.
Thank you for the briefing. I'm from Yonhan News Agency from Korea, and I have a question to Ms. Yoon. And according to the report, and you say the Security Council sanctions have worsened this human rights situation in North Korea, but Korea wouldn't it be more appropriate to say that the nuclear development and missile launch by North Korea government have worsened the human rights situation in North Korea? Please comment on this, please.
Yeah. I think this report it is very clear in the sense that the North Korean government is the responsible for the horrific situation that the North Korean people are under. So yes, we do have a resource allocation that prioritizes the nuclear programs and weapons development programs, and that are not prioritizing and they're neglecting the needs of North Korean people for food or basic necessities. Also, but I mean, it is also a fact that the UN Security Council sanctions are also targeting the economy. So it's unavoidable that there are unintended effects that come from the enforcement of the sanctions. But I mean, the key is, what does the North Korean government do when those unintended consequences are there? And the reaction of the North Korean people was not to try to improve, to loosen control, but strengthening control and strengthening ideological campaigns in order to prevent unrest from coming because of the worsening economic situation.
Yeah, and maybe I would add that there's, as Lena said, the North Korean government is the responsible one, but sanctions obviously create a certain environment, and if that environment, if the imports of food into North Korea are going down, then there's less to allocate in an uneven, unfair, horribly unequal distribution system. This is obviously not saying that the sanctions are the cause of the misery in North Korea, but they can exacerbate it. They can make a bad situation worse. But thank you for raising that. It's a really good question, and it gives us a chance to clarify it. John, did you want to say something on that?
I just wanted to clarify that absolutely the focus of this report, the bulk of this report and the methodology used focuses on the impacts of Kim Jong-un's decision to seal the border in the beginning of 2020. So I just want to be crystal clear that although we mention the possible unintended consequences of newer sanctions in 2016 and 2017, this is not at all the bulk of the causality, the causes of the decreases in imports of essential goods and food into North Korea. Absolutely the first and foremost cause of that was Kim Jong-un's decisions about sealing the border, some of which predated the COVID pandemic, but then really accelerated, as the methodology shows, the before and after photographs of satellite imagery, just in a dramatic escalation of border fencing and orders to shoot on sight, and also just preventing goods from coming or going, people from going to China and bringing back goods, all of that shut down. And that is the primary cause of the humanitarian impacts that we are documenting in this report, and they come after 2020, or after the beginning of 2020, just to clarify.
And it's worth noting too that all sanctions regimes have humanitarian exemption policies, and part of the review that we're calling for of sanctions is to make sure, I would recommend that they make sure that these humanitarian exemption policies are being taken advantage of, looking at issues of overcompliance, making sure that governments and financial institutions aren't going too far in a way that undermines the humanitarian situation, makes a very bad situation worse. So next question, we're done? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ayano Yamakoshi from GG Press, Japanese news agency. I have a question for Ms. Yoon. So in your recommendation, you said Security Council should hold a meeting on human rights in the DPRK as much as possible. But China and Russia has been opposed it to hold such a meeting, because they say Security Council is not the place to discuss about human rights. So what's your comment? What's your comment, or what's your opinion on their thoughts? Thank you.
I mean, we have had many discussions on the human rights situation in North Korea as a threat to international peace and security. So it's perfectly something that's like done in the past and it's doable. But I mean, also, when we think of the weapons development program or the nuclear program in North Korea, like it's really important to kind of be thinking of how these are two sides of the same coin. The North Korean government is able to develop these programs and allocate its resources into that sector because of the repressive system that exists in North Korea. Without the totalitarian system that North Korea has, the nuclear program cannot exist.
And I'd like to add that the Security Council, it's a false complaint that the Security Council should not be discussing human rights. The fact is, human rights are at the center of most, if not all, of the issues that the Security Council is dealing with. Hundreds of human rights officers that are part of the missions that the Security Council has mandated. Russia and China they will raise issues, particularly I think Russia talking about human rights from its perspective in Ukraine. They're happy to talk about it when it suits their interests. So there's a bit of a selectivity in their approach to this, that they'll talk about human rights on certain issues, but not on others. The fact is, it's a part of their work, and we often see the representatives of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, including the High Commissioner himself, addressing the Security Council. So that's a bogus problem. We have seen that Russia and China have worked hard in the UN's Budget Committee, the Fifth Committee, to undermine human rights investigations, whether it's related to North Korea, Iran, Syria, so many issues, but fortunately they haven't had as much success as they'd like. But this is an issue that is really a bogus complaint. So who's next? Okay.
Thank you. I'm Sahar with CNN. I just have a question. I know in your report that it states that the border guards have a standing order to shoot on sight anyone who approaches without permission. Do you have any information or research as to if anyone has been shot the last few years, and if so, how many? Because I know you said that you guys conducted satellite imagery and conducted research with journalists, so if you just have any information on that.
I mean, it's in the report. I really don't know on the top of my head, but there were, I mean, maybe like more than a dozen cases reported in different media that have contacts inside North Korea of people that had been shot while either trying to escape or, especially in the beginning when they didn't know, trying to conduct smuggling, informal trade activities. But I mean, I'm happy to look for the section and shoot you an email later if you're interested.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
It's hidden somewhere in one of those 161 pages that are there. I'm going to take a question that we've gotten from the Zoom. So this is Jacob from Access DPRK, and his question is for Lena. The question is, during the period of this report, were there any indications that North Korea's border control measures have begun to loosen, or are things still as strict today?
Sorry, you said Jacob Bogler?
Yes.
Yeah. So Jacob was one of our consultants in the satellite imagery project. Have they loosened? No. Our report covers 2018 until September 2023. So I mean, all the most recent developments that have been happening since then, we haven't really incorporated in the report. But until the period I covered, I didn't see any sense that the controls were loosening, and if anything, my feeling is that they're very solidly in place.
Next, we don't, you choose.
Thank you for the briefing. So my name is Yu from Kyoto News Japanese Media. So I have follow-up question about the development of nuclear and missile program. How does the development nuclear and missile program affect the human rights and the human daily life who lives in Pyongyang or North Korea?
And
What do you think about the development programs?
So I mentioned the resource allocation issue, right? Like, so we have a really big chunk of the population that are suffering food insecurity and extreme poverty, lack of in opportunity, but also extremely repressive system. I mean, would North Koreans really live in North Korea if they could freely travel around the world?
And one of the recommendations that we have for UN member states is that they actually support a new investigation. This year is the 10th anniversary of the Commission of Inquiry report from 2014 about North Korea, and we think that it's time for an update of that, and this is exactly one of the things that we would like to see investigated in depth. What is the connection between the resources that are being diverted to the nuclear and ballistic missile programs, resources that are not being used elsewhere? What is the link between the human rights abuses and these programs? So we would like to see, some real in-depth reporting delivered publicly and to UN member states on this, and we think that this is something that should have been done before, but now's the right time. It's 10th anniversary. Let's get it done now.
May I add one thing? So when I reading in North Korea, the slogans and then the words I often heard is that the reason we are suffering from the all those difficulties is because we need to develop nuclear weapons. Without nuclear weapons, United States and South Korea, they're gonna invade us. So to protect our land and our families and the loved ones, we need to develop nuclear weapons. So once we have it, then we can relocate the resources and then build a economic strong power nation. And then they say by the 2012, they're gonna have the first open the doors to strong and prosperous country, and then it got extended to 2020, and then and so on. So what I want to say is that in such a totalitarian regime, all what needed is that one person's decision. He has enough, Cam has enough resources and to,
please. Security Council consultations have
resources to provide the necessities to its people, but he's the one who has never made that decision and used that for his own people. And I think he's purposefully neglect its people struggling to better control and then manipulation of to uphold his own power.
Sorry, next question, anyone?
Thank you. I'm with the Wall Street Journal.
You mentioned in your report that some Chinese diplomats have visited North Korea last year. I was wondering if this is a sign that things, pre-COVID kind of economic activities may be able to, resume this year. Or my second question is, how do you comment on China's position on the humanitarian crisis in North Korea? Thank you.
So I haven't included any of that in the report. But North Korea has for a long time relied almost solely on China, and since late last year, and we haven't included that on the report again. Trade has increased again, both with China and Russia, and this has included many things, but it has included as well medicine and food. But even if official trade has increased, it still remains lower than in 2019. And official trade in North Korea really tailored to the need of the leadership and Pyongyang. So while increase in trade and some partial reopening to certain states will bring products back into North Korea, it really doesn't have a meaningful impact for ordinary North Koreans.
One point that I'd like to make, going back to one of the earlier questions that our colleague John pointed out, is the many opportunities that we will have this year to discuss human rights in North Korea. It can happen anytime, right? And if there's a dispute, if, for example, Russia and China decide that they think that North Korean human rights should not be discussed, they can have a procedural vote in the Security Council. There are no vetoes for a procedural vote. Let's have those discussions, let's have those debates, let's have those procedural votes. Sometimes I feel that Security Council members are a little too conservative. It seems that they don't want to have a fight, but the disagreements are clear. We have Japan right now is the president of the Security Council, and then in a couple months that South Korea will be president, then the US and UK will have their presidencies, and there are other members of the Security Council. So let's discuss it early and often, as the saying goes. And anyway, that's just something that I thought we'd throw out there. Other questions? Evelyn, you had a follow-up?
Why not the General Assembly? You reach more people that way.
Well, the General Assembly does discuss human rights. It's not. It's a standing issue in the Third Committee. So that's.
Korea is an issue.
The situation of human rights in North Korea is a standing Third Committee General Assembly issue, which is good, but there's a lot that could be added to that Third Committee resolution. We've been a little, again, they're very conservative, often don't want to change language that's carried over from year to year, but I think my colleague John would like to make a point.
On the UN, procedure, there was a question earlier about linking human rights with, there's a question about linking human rights issues with the nuclear program. We are currently trying to get the UN Human Rights Council, which is not here but in Geneva, to pass a resolution that would request a follow-up report on the Commission of Inquiry, and that would include this as a topic, a link between human rights and nuclear program. But if that doesn't work, or if that report is not forthcoming quickly, that doesn't mean the bodies here in New York at the UN can't act. The UN Security Council members could request a report from the UN Secretary General. They could request a report from all relevant bodies, or a briefing in any UN Security Council debate about the linkages. And they could ask relevant agencies in the UN to prepare reporting on these linkages. they could also, they could pass a resolution, but because of the China and Russia veto, that's not going to happen. But the UN General Assembly, in its next resolution on North Korea, could pass a resolution requesting that reporting as well for themselves or for other groups. Or you could write a letter, or members could write a letter to the Secretary General asking for him to compile reporting from UN agencies. There are many other ways. But the point is, there's a lot that could be done to raise attention to the North Korean human rights situation and the linkages with the nuclear program. One of our larger designs is to intermingle and tangle the human rights issues with the proliferation issues, not for the sake of human rights only, but because we think they are inextricably linked. You cannot address the nuclear program without addressing the human rights abuses which fuel it and which undergird it. So by linking them together, it ensures that if there's ever negotiation with North Korea again about its security posture, that it include human rights issues and not just non-proliferation issues.
That's a really good point, and I'm glad John made it. There are other options too within the UN system. The Secretary General could ask for this report on his own, right? He doesn't actually need a request from a UN legislative body, even though we know that Secretaries General are reluctant to do so. The High Commissioner could do it. So there are many options out there, and they should all be explored. We are never fazed by a Security Council veto. We just look for another venue in the UN. One of the nice things about the UN system is that if you've got a veto, well, you've got the Human Rights Council, you've got the General Assembly, you've got the Secretary General, you've got the High Commissioner, you've got groups of member states that can come together and request things, right? So there's a lot that can be done, and we should take advantage of those options and not just give up because one or two of the permanent members of the Security Council don't like it. So next question. Anyone else? Going once, going twice. No.
Can I?
Yeah. Question. Mm-hmm.
Just because there are other questions, if you don't mind me asking a non-North Korea question. So I wanted
Sure.
to ask about, as you may have seen, there was a little bit of controversy around Pramila Paten's recent report, and I wanted to ask on Human Rights Watch's position when it comes to sexual violence and conflict, particularly on October 7th.
Right. Thanks. Yes, we have seen that report. It's very sobering. We at Human Rights Watch are working on our own quite extensive report on the horrific events of October 7th. I can't say exactly when that will be out, but this is one of the issues, obviously, that is there. So you'll have to watch our space to see when that comes. I can say that we strongly support the recommendation in that report for Israel to cooperate with the Commission of Inquiry, the UN Commission of Inquiry, on an investigation. And we support accountability and justice for all the victims of sexual and gender-based violence, whether they're in Israel or Palestinians, for all of the victims. So again, thank you, and hopefully we'll have more to say on that in the coming weeks and months.
Can I have my last comment?
One last comment? Yes.
Thank you. So thank you for your question about the sanctions. I think sanctions are essential, it's necessary, and it's important because it is signals to the Kim that he is responsible and there will be consequences for his actions. What we must do is that constantly monitor and update the existing sanctions to close any loopholes that might allow those invasions. And additionally, this information should be widely disseminated in and out of the country so that the people inside North Korea and the international community are aware of the implications of the North Korean nuclear weaponries. And the last thing, you've asked the China and the Russia's veto power. Every time China and Russia veto actions on the North Korean human rights issues, it only highlights that how similar their country on policies might be to the North Korea. So yeah, that's gonna be my last comment. Thank you.
Maybe we clarify we don't have a position on
Sorry?
No, I was saying maybe we should clarify that HRW doesn't have a position on sanctions. I'm saying on economic sanctions for security.
Yeah, I think we're good. So, yeah, if anyone has any follow-up questions, we're here now. We can talk to you. You can email us. And thank you again for coming.
Thank you. Maybe we should have clarified that the HRW doesn't have a position